Welcome to Bible Mind, and I'm glad that y'all are here tonight. And we're going to talk about Constantine tonight and how that was a turning point for the church. There's maybe historically, maybe some not so great things about it, in my opinion, because before then the church had to be the church in the midst of a lot of tumultuous times, and had to survive and had to rely on the strength of the Lord. After that, as we're going to see, things got a little easier for the church. And when things got easier for the church, maybe they turned their attention to some other areas, some, not all. But anyway, so we're going to get into it by starting. To understand one of the most pivotal moments in the church since the day of Pentecost, we're going to have to go back sometime to understand the Roman Empire a little bit. Now, if that'll switch there. When Terry and I went to Rome in 2017, one of the most striking things about that area that we were in is you're looking at things that are almost 3,000 years old. That's old. I mean, there's nothing in El Dorado except for, maybe a pebble or some dirt or something that's 3,000 years old. And so you're looking at buildings, you're looking at structures, you're looking at things that are significantly old. And so Rome was founded about 750 BC. By 509 BC, it had become a republic. In the 4th century BC, the Gauls, which that's kind of up in this area here, the Gauls started conquering the Italian peninsula, and when they got to Rome, they almost defeated them, but in a turn of events, Rome kind of fought back and were able to stave them off. And so in one battle, they expanded their control then over the Italian peninsula. In a series of other wars, you wound up with a map kind of like this by the mid-1st century BC Rome. And Rome was in a state of political unrest. Onto this turbulent scene emerged Gaius Julius Caesar from an aristocratic family of limited wealth. Through a series of political alliances and military exercises, he became preeminent over Rome around 48 BC. On the 15th of March, 44 BC, Julius Caesar is assassinated by some of his cabinet. Now, how many of you heard the saying, beware the Ides of March, right? Okay, so where that comes from, actually the Romans didn't number their days sequentially throughout the month. Okay, so you had the three main divisions. Somewhere around the 5th to the 7th day was called the Nones of March, Nones, and then the middle, which that was somewhere between the 13th and 15th, the middle was the Ides of the month. That was the Ides. So you had the Nones, the Ides, and then the first day of the next month was called the Calends, okay, which is where we get a word, calendar, right? And so the Ides kind of shifts from month to month, but in March, the Ides of March is March 15th. So after Julius Caesar was assassinated by his closest friends, you had a man by the name of Octavius. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. And so when Julius Caesar was killed, he assumed the throne, and he took on the family name of Caesar. Okay, so that was Julius Caesar's actual name. So he took on Caesar, and then he took on Augustus, which meant supreme. So he's like, I'm the supreme Caesar. Right. Are you familiar with Augustus Caesar? Does that ring a bell? All right. So he was the Caesar or the emperor during the time of Jesus' birth. After the leadership eventually leaves the Caesar family, the title of the ruler kind of remains. Okay. So it started out Caesar was the family name, but then after that they were still called Caesars. All right. Now the Roman pronunciation or the Greek pronunciation of this, they didn't have the soft C sound like we say Caesar. They only had the hard C sound, which was Kaiser, right? And so does that sound familiar? You know, that's where we get the German word Kaiser as well, spelled a little different. So this was carried on for a little while. You had after that you had Tiberius, and then Caligula and Claudius and Nero, which we've talked about Nero a little bit. He was a bad dude, wasn't he? That's the one that had heavy persecution of the church, and Paul and Peter were both killed under Nero. Nero was so bad, and we talked about this a little bit too very early in our study. Nero was so bad that even the Romans cheered when he died. Okay, so they're like, you know, they did not like him. And so when he went away, they were glad. And when he died, they didn't even want his son to reign in his place. So they just made sure everybody was wiped out so that, you know, he couldn't carry on. And so again, they went into a turbulent time when they had like 4 different emperors in 1 year. I mean, just one right after another. And then we get to one called, oh, that's those guys, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Then we get to Vespasian. Vespasian was emperor around 69, I think is when he came in. And before he was emperor, he was sent to, during this turbulent time, the last 4 that I just showed you, they were all kind of fighting or whatever. Well, the Jewish people decided, you know, this is a good time for us to, you know, take back our land and revolt or whatever. So that's when the Jewish revolt happened. And so Vespasian was sent to Palestine to squash the rebellion. And so he gets over there and finds his opportunity to become emperor. So he goes back to Rome, and he sends his son Titus to finish off the job. And Titus is the one that actually conquers Jerusalem and burns the temple and tears everything down and all that. And so Vespasian is also the one who built, take a guess, something in Rome. Colosseum, that's right. Vespasian is the one that built the Colosseum sometime after 70 AD. And so during the turbulent time, you know, he comes to power and kind of solidifies everything. And during his reign was kind of a golden era in the Roman Empire. There were times during this period that there was some persecution of the church. But even with that, the church continued to grow, the church continued to prosper. And so this lasted to about 192 AD, kind of this cycle of everything's peaceful for a while, and then there's some persecution, and then maybe peaceful a little longer. Then in 192, the Severian dynasty comes in, and over the next 49 years, they have 25 emperors. So that's like every other year they're getting a new emperor. So that's kind of a turbulent time, and so it's a time of real instability. By the late 200s, Rome is divided into 3 main areas. They had many wars. They had the military was demanding a higher budget. The more they tried to spread out, and the more they tried to take over lands or whatever, it was very taxing on them militarily, and so they started heavily taxing the people. There was inventing new taxes. There was a urine tax. There was just all kind of things, that they, if you don't know what that is, that's you pay to go to the bathroom. And so, which, in Europe, sometimes you still do that. But in the middle of all this, the plague hit that we talked about. Remember the plague of Cyprian that we talked about a few weeks ago. So that hit during this time. So I'm talking about this is a really tumultuous time for Rome, and the empire was almost collapsing on itself. So in the middle of all this, just as Rome's about to fall apart, you have a guy come on the scene named Diocletian. Diocletian comes in, and he really brings stability. He's a great leader. He pulls everything together and kind of brings the glory days of the Roman Empire back. But it's sad to say that usually the best leaders in the Roman Empire, as far as keeping things together, tended to be the hardest ones on the church. Okay? And so we're going to see that in just a minute. But Diocletian comes on the scene, and he recognizes a few problems with the Roman Empire. One, it's too big. I mean, this is too much for one guy to handle. And so he has a good old buddy, and so he gets his buddy Maximian. He's kind of I don't know he looks more like a bouncer or a bodyguard or something, right? Something like that. But he gets his good old buddy Maximian. They get along well together. They're kind of on the same page. And so he says, okay, Maximian, you take the western part, I'll take the eastern part, and we'll just kind of co-reign the Roman Empire, and we'll get along fine, and I'm really the big boss, but we're just kind of, you do your thing, I'll do mine, and we'll split this down the middle. Another problem that Diocletian figured out was there was always a succession problem. So when an emperor died, who's going to take his place? And so everybody's like fighting over who's going to do it or whatever. So he sets himself and Maximian up as Augustus. Remember, that means supreme. So they're Augustus. They're in a position called Augustus. And then they appoint two others that they call Caesars. Okay, so you have Augustus, and then you have so they're like the big Caesars, and then you have the junior Caesars. The junior Caesars, one of them's name was Galerius, and the other, I don't know why his eyes are looking up, kind of rolling his eyes there, but the next one, his name was Flavius Valerius Constantius. Okay, so Constantius was, I'll get back to the map in a minute, but he was kind of, if you remember our map, he was up in this area over here. And so they had put him kind of in that quadrant. So now you have what they call the tetrarchy, all right? So you have four rulers, and they've kind of divided it all up. And so that makes an easier rule. Constantius was assigned Gaul and Britain. We'll get back to our map right here. So this is Constantius was up here. I thought I had more people on. Oh, here they come. Yeah, there they are. Okay, now you kind of see where they are. So we have Diocletian. He kind of comes in this area. He really sets up his headquarters in Antioch in Syria. Galerius is up in this area. Maximian, he kind of takes this area down here, and Constantius up there. Now, this arrangement was working pretty good. The Tetrarch emperors were more or less sovereign in their own lands, and they traveled with their own imperial courts, administrators, secretaries, and armies, and they were actually joined by blood and marriage too. So there was like, okay, you marry my daughter, and we'll all be emperors, but we'll be kin too. So Diocletian and, actually Galeria married Diocletian's daughter, whose name was Valeria, so she was Valeria Galeria. Which reminds me of, anybody ever read the book Amelia Bedelia? Okay. So, Terry reads that to the kids, Amelia Bedelia, and somewhere in there she says, "Stop calling me honey." I don't even know what it means, but there it is. And you have an Amelia. Diocletian and Maximilian now they styled themselves as brothers, right? So they're kind of co-emperors, but they're like brothers. And so the senior co-emperors formally adopted Galerius and Constantius as sons in 293. So they're trying to make this like a big happy family all around. So these relationships implied a line of succession. Remember, usually kings, when they died, their sons take over. And so when they adopted Constantius and Galerius, that told everybody they're going to be the next Augustuses, whichever that one that is. At some time in 299, the emperors took part in a ceremony of sacrifice of divination in an attempt to predict the future. And this happened really over in this area right here in the area of Antioch with Diocletian. When the future couldn't be determined, there had to be a problem. Why can't we divine the future? Well, whose fault was it? Obviously, it was the Christians' fault, because they don't sacrifice to our gods. They won't conform to our ways, so they're keeping the gods from telling us the future. So we're going to get them. And so Diocletian, now he in history goes down as probably the worst persecutor of the Christians, but at first he wasn't really for killing them as much as he was, he just wanted to say, okay, y'all are second-rate citizens, and you can't serve in the military, and you can't have any rank, and you can't hold any offices, and that kind of stuff. Galerius, he was a little more of the Christians need to be exterminated. And that was his thought on it. Well, when they couldn't divine the future, he ordered all the members of his house to perform sacrifices to the gods to purify the palace. And so for the next couple of years, his focus grew toward the Christians being the cause of all of Rome's problems. I mean, from the plagues to the wars to everything going on, it's got to be these crazy Christians. And so he ordered that the deacon Romanus of Caesarea have his tongue removed for defying the order of the courts and interrupting official sacrifices. Romanus was then sent to prison, where he was executed on the 17th of November, 303. Diocletian hated the Christians, but like I said, he just wanted to forbid them these ranks. And Galerius said, no, we gotta totally exterminate these guys. So in February of 303, Diocletian issued his first edict against Christians, and the edict ordered the destruction of Christian scriptures and places of worship across the empire, and prohibited Christians from assembling for worship altogether. And so a heavy persecution started up against the church. There was one individual named Peter, not even sure, I'm going to take a stab at it, okay? Get ready to laugh. Cubicularius, that sound, do you love it? Did I do great? Is it perfect, okay? He actually held a position in Diocletian's palace, and so he was stripped, he was raised high and scourged, and then salt and vinegar were poured into his wounds, and he was slowly boiled over an open flame. And these are the kinds of things that they were doing to Christians during this time. Fortunately, this period of this intense, and there were Christians that were dismembered, that they were pulled limb for limb and things like this, but this only lasted this intensely for just a few months, because that was issued in February. By about April, they're like, really, this isn't really stopping them from worshiping the Lord. Wow. This isn't really stopping the church from growing. Can you imagine? And so they decided, okay, enough with the pulling people apart. Let's just, tamper that down just a little bit. The sufferings of the martyrs actually strengthened the church's resolve to follow Christ, and strengthen their resolve to fellow Christians. Constantius and Maximian, actually, while that was going on over here, they kind of followed the first edict, and there were successive edicts after that against the Christians, but Constantius and Maximian, they kind of backed off of it a little bit. We don't really, we're not really that big on pulling people apart or whatever. So, and also Constantius, he had a wife named Helena. Does anybody recognize that name? Helena was a conspicuous Christian. So he's like, if I'm out there pulling Christians apart, my wife might be part of it. So, he kind of had to step back a little bit. Later, Galerius rescinded the order in 311, and that's kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but he rescinded it largely in part because it wasn't doing any good. So he just said, okay, we're going to just tear that up, and we're not going to persecute Christians like that anymore, because it had just clearly failed. Now, something happened that had never happened before in the history of the Roman Empire. Diocletian and Maximian retires. Usually, the Roman Empire went out with a blaze of glory some kind of way, with his friend stabbing him in the back or whatever. But they decided, we've had our fun. Let's retire. So Diocletian, he goes up and he retires in what's now split Croatia, and he grows a vegetable garden. He has this big elaborate palace built, and he's just there. He's just happy building his vegetable garden, and we'll talk about some of this in just a second, but the things kind of start falling apart. And people would approach him and say, we need you to come back and be emperor and lead us again. He said, you wouldn't ask me to do that if you saw the cabbage I grew this year. And so he was just as happy as he could be with the retirement. And so he was doing that thing. He spends the rest of his life watching his tetrarchic system fail, torn by selfish ambitions and his successors. He likely took his own life around 311. Constantine now, does anybody know where he comes on the scene? He kind of sounds a little bit like this guy, right? So Constantine is Constantius's son. Okay, so at this time, Constantine he's a soldier in the army, and he's going around doing the soldier thing and fighting wars or whatever. Well, he comes back home, comes back over here and hangs out with Dad, and when Diocletian and Maximian retired, wait, it says click. Yeah, there we go. All right, so when Diocletian and Maximian retired, Constantius and Galerius were elevated to Augustus, and two new Caesars had to be picked. Instead of Constantius's son Constantine set as part of the Tetrarchy, he was passed over, and this guy Severus was put in his place. I should have put a picture of what am I trying to say, Harry Potter Severus guy or whatever, But no, it wasn't him. It's this guy. So Severus was, and then Maxentius, that's Maximian's son. So his son gets to go in, but Constantius's son did not get to go in. They put Severus up there. So when Constantius died in 306, he recommended his son be instated as Caesar over this area. And he confessed that to the military. Well, the military thought, well, that's a good idea. So they declared Constantine emperor over that area. Okay, so now we kind of got like 5 players in the field here. At the same time, Maxentius usurped control over Italy and Africa, and so he's going up trying to take over. And Maxentius called his dad out of retirement to help. So Maximian comes in to help. Galerius, he's over here. He tells Severus, well, you need to make sure you hold on to your area. And so he gathers all the army that he had in his control, which was Maximian's old army. And so he starts going into Rome. Well, as soon as Maximian arrives on the scene, all of Severus's army defects to him because that's their old commander, right? And so he's just left by himself. So he's like, see you guys, I'm checking out. It's been fun. Y'all have fun with this. And so he leaves. In 311, Galerius died of disease, and Licinius took over in the east. Maxentius wanted to push a principled paganism, so he resurrects a more hostile environment against the Christians again. And so here we go with a little bit more persecution coming in. Constantine was a little bit more tolerant of Christians because, like I said a while ago, his mother was a Christian, right? And so Constantius, he wasn't really, it's not known that he was a Christian, but he was tolerant of it. Eusebius writes and quotes Constantine as having said, my father revered the Christian God and uniformly prospered, while the emperors who worshipped the heathen gods died a miserable death. Therefore, that I might enjoy a happy life and reign, I will imitate the example of my father and join myself to the cause of the Christians, who are growing daily while the heathen are diminishing. And so Constantine, he may have been, and there's a little bit of debate, and we'll talk about it in a minute, whether or not he was a Christian or not, but he was just kind of from a political standpoint saying, you know what, I'm kind of watching all this, and I'm seeing people that are tolerant of Christians excel, people that are harsh to Christians, they're dying violent deaths. So I'm just looking at this kind of objectively here and saying, this is better. And so he kind of leaned over that way. So it's hard to know if he had any kind of genuine faith, especially early on, or if it was just political pragmatism at this point. But by this time there were a large number of Christians throughout Italy and Africa, despite the efforts to wipe them out. So they appealed to Constantine for help. And so here Maxentius is up here, and he's kind of reinstating being harsh on Christians. And so the Christians all from Carthage to Alexandria to Rome, they're sending messengers to Constantine saying, we need some help because this guy's being mean to us. And they felt like Constantine would be a little more open or willing to help them. The direction that Constantine's going to be coming into Rome, he will have to cross This is the Milvian Bridge. This is the Milvian Bridge as it sits now. So if you're coming down the peninsula of Italy, you're going to cross the Milvian Bridge to get into Rome. All right. Now, this is not the Milvian Bridge where the battle happened, because that bridge was destroyed. But the night before the battle, on October 27th, Constantine had a vision. The vision was basically, they say he had a vision of a cross, but this is the Greek letter chi, all right, represented by it looks like an X, but it's kind of, you can kind of imagine it's a cross turned on its side a little bit, okay? And then this that looks like a letter P, that's the Greek letter rho. It makes the R sound. Okay, so the chi and the rho are the first two letters in the Greek word for Christ, or Christos. And so Constantine has this vision, and he is kind of perplexed by it or whatever, but he hears a message that says, by this sign you will conquer. And so Constantine thought, I think God's trying to say something to me, or whatever the vision is. And so he makes all of his soldiers paint this on their shields. And so they go across, and in the meantime, Maxentius, he didn't want Constantine to get into the city, so he wants the battle to be on the other side of the bridge. So his plan is, he marches his army. By the way, Constantine had an army of about 100,000. Maxentius had an army of about 200,000, so about twice the army. So he marches outside the city. They destroy the bridge behind them, the Milvian Bridge, and they built a pontoon bridge. So that was kind of like their way of escape. If things aren't going well, we're going to escape across the bridge, and then we're going to pull it down behind us, and they won't be able to get across. And so they get over there to the battle, and the battle ensues, and it's not going well for Maxentius. I mean, Constantine's coming down hard, and they're dying left and right, and so it's time for them to make their escape, right? So they try to get across the bridge. As they're going across the bridge collapses, and they fall into the river, and of course their heavy armor, including Maxentius, heavy army, they just sink to the bottom, and they're just glub, 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 glub. And it's very reminiscent. A lot of people have made the comparison of what comes to your mind?
The Red Sea.
The Dead Sea crossing, the Red Sea crossing, and the Egyptians dying in the water. And so people have made kind of that comparison a little bit, that this was a God-like intervention. And so the army was completely crushed. Constantine is able to come into the city. When he comes into Rome, remember, the people of Rome have requested Constantine to come down. So when Constantine comes into the city, he's cheered and welcomed as a hero. They're like, we're glad you're here. And so he comes into the city, and he takes seriously the appearance that the Christian God had helped him win the battle. And so he comes into the city welcomed as a hero, and he's the first Roman emperor who didn't go to the temple of Jupiter to sacrifice to the gods when they came home after winning a battle. I mean, that goes way back. Every Roman emperor, when they won a battle, they would come in and they would make sacrifice in the temple of Jupiter. Constantine did not do that, because he was saying, hey, I feel like, the God of the Christians is the one that helped me, and so I'm not going in to do that. So he gets up and makes a speech, and this is one quote from the speech. It says, "By this saving sign, the true token of bravery, I have delivered your city from the yoke of the tyrant." And so as a result, Constantine takes control of the whole Western Empire. Not sure what my next click is. Let's see. Okay. No more maps for you, apparently. But you remember what the map looks like. So Constantine takes over the whole Western Empire, and Licentius is on the eastern side, so he has kind of his own rule going on. Constantine's on the west. In 313, Constantine issues the Edict of Milan. Okay, the Edict of Milan said it was basically religious freedom. It's like, we're not going to persecute anybody. Whatever you believe, you're free to worship however you want to, with exceptions. I mean, those that, believed in sacrificing children or whatever, it's like, no, you can't do that. But, within reason. So that was, for the first time, the Christians just had the freedom to worship and to express themselves the way that they wanted to. When Diocletian was persecuting the church, he was actually seizing land from churches and bishops and things like this, and of course all that was documented. The Romans were real good at documenting things, and so Constantine went back and looked at these records and said, okay, we're going to restore all the land that Diocletian had taken away from the Christians, and we're going to restore that back to them. He passed a lot of laws that were highly favorable to the Christian faith. It almost was like, I'm kind of putting things in place to make you succeed. And he was one of the first to establish what a blue law is, right? Blue law is things that you can't work on Sunday and stuff like that. And so Constantine was enacting some things like that, saying, okay, we're going to respect Sunday as the Lord's Day, and had certain things in place for that. These reforms so blatantly were favorable to Christianity, not only won the support of the Christians in his territory of rule, but Christians in all parts of the Roman Empire. So kind of think about this, okay? So Constantine's in the west, you have Licinius in the east, all right? Where are the Christians? They're in both. And so now Constantine is issuing all these favorable things about the Christians. So he has a coalition of people over the entire empire, not just over the West. And so cutting a lot of the details out of it, but this made it really easy for Constantine to eventually take over the entire and unify the entire Roman Empire, because he had a base of people that were all about some Constantine. Right? And so this kind of gave him a base to do that. Now just think about this for a minute. 10 years earlier, Christians were being ripped apart. Now Christianity is put in the forefront by the same empire that were persecuting them 10 years earlier. Can God turn things around? Amen. Can God change things in a short period of time? Yes, he can. Kings and authority come from where? They come from God, right? In Daniel 2:20 and 21, it says, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the season. He removes kings and he raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding." We also know in Romans 13:1, it says, "For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed from God." It fascinates me to read prophets like Samuel and Elijah and Elisha go into other countries, and I don't know if you pick up on this sometimes when you're reading through the Old Testament, especially like maybe in Samuel and Kings and Chronicles, but you'll see these prophets, and God will say, okay, I want you to go up to Damascus and anoint so-and-so as king over Aram, and go over to Moab and anoint this king, and you're like, wait a minute, why do they care about a prophet of God coming to anoint, And so we think in very limited terms sometimes, don't we? God has always done things all over the globe. Even when the story of the Bible is following the children of Israel, God's never been limited to the children of Israel. God is always working around the world. And so, we see that in just these little instances that God has a larger vision than just us. So I think, sometimes we think that God is the God of the United States. And we think in terms of, we need our nation to be this and that so that we can go out and reach other nations. And what God's not limited to the United States. God's not only concerned about what happens here. But God is the God of the world. God is the God of the globe. And just when the church was in the middle of their worst persecution to date, God raises up a leader who favors Christianity above everything else and puts them in a position that they've never been in before. Never before had they been ever, since the birth of Christianity, have they been in a position like this. Now, this nation was founded by Christian people who were looking for a freedom to worship God, right? And for 200 years, we've been considered a Christian nation, by and large. I don't think we can say that anymore. I don't think we can legitimately say that we are a Christian nation. We are definitely a nation with a Christian population, with a Christian remnant. But I have a question for you to discuss with me tonight. And it's a little bit of a tricky question. But the question is God in control? We say that. It's an easy catch line, right? Anybody remember the Twila Pair song? God is in control. And I don't remember the other words, but no, y'all don't remember that song? Oh, she was big time. When was that, Terry? Like early 90s maybe or something? Early 90s. She was like, if they would have had K-Love back then, she would have been every other song. Okay? So, anyway, but we say that all the time. What does that mean? What does it mean God is in control?
He knows what's going to happen in the future.
Okay? But does knowing mean controlling?
No.
If you know that your kid is going to, if they're riding their bike and you know they're fixing to fall off the cliff, and you just watch them, and sure enough they fall off the cliff, did you control them?
No.
No, but you knew.
The word says that, Satan's the god of this world, So I kind of see it both ways, but I can't say for definite.
Well, we're supposed to trust God.
Absolutely. I'm making you think a little bit.
That comes with the free will of people.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, God is in control, but He gives us free will, and we choose to do right or wrong. And there's a lot of wrong in the world, but not. God didn't cause that. God allows it, but He's still in control.
Yeah.
Okay. Mind if I just poke that a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. So if you see somebody, if you go to the grocery store and you see a woman with a child that's knocking food off the shelves and kicking people when they go by and yelling obscenities, you're going to say that woman is not in control of her kid, right? So if we say that God is in control, but He gives us free will and we're doing other things, is that contradictory? I'm just making you think tonight. This is not theology that I'm throwing at you. I'm just making you think.
His will is immutable. It can't be, nothing can happen that's outside of His will, but He does allow us to have freedom. So though a man may choose to rage against God, His plans will still exist.
Okay? His plan still exists no matter what we do.
The thing is, this ultimate thing that is going to happen, but until it happens, all these other things, it may, like the children of Israel, He wanted them to go into that promised land. But it was a long time before they got there because of their rebellion and so they wandered and they eventually got there. That was his plan. But other things interfered and intervened, but it ultimately His plan, and His plan is that one day He's going to set up His rule and reign here on the earth, and certain things are going to happen, but until that happens, there's a lot of other things that can be this way or that way, depends on man's rebellion or obedience.
But doesn't it come down to the attitude of our hearts? He's sorting our hearts out, the sheep and the goats. And it's when all these things happen, it's how do we react?
Okay? So there's definitely a measure of the heart involved. But what you're saying is, can we still say this statement, or should we amend that to say God's partially in control? Or God's ultimately in control? Tell me what you think, Jared. You're glaring at me. It is a tough one.
I'd say,
You didn't come here for it to be easy tonight, did you?
I'd say he's fully in control.
Okay?
He just chooses when it's necessary to exercise that control. You know, the parent that's not stopping their kid from, you know, knocking the stuff off the shelves, they still technically have control over that kid. They're just not exercising it.
They have the ability to have control over that kid. Okay?
He just needs a whipping.
Pastor talked about some discipline this morning, didn't he? Okay? Want to know what I think?
Yes.
Okay? I think it's a little bit like this. God's in control like a coach is in control of a Little League basketball team.
Yeah.
All right? So he has a plan. This guy right here, let's call him Bob. Bob has a plan. He's taught them how to play basketball. He's told them the rules of basketball. And he tells them what the plays are. And then they go out and they do exactly, and they execute that plan exactly, right?
Sort of.
Anybody ever watch Little League sports? So he turns them loose, and they go out there, and one of them's double dribbling, and one of them's picking his nose, and the other one's sitting over there, you know, trying to walk the line like this, and, you know, they're all doing this stuff, you know, and he's like, come here, guys. Let me tell you the plan again. And so he's sending them out, and they're doing these things, and, you know, a few of them make some baskets, and he's like, all right, that's good, you did great, let's do that again. Then one of them scores a point, and he goes up into the stands to tell his mom about it. He's like, the game's not over, you know, come back down here, we're gonna do this some more. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. The team goes ahead at times, and sometimes they fall behind. But the coach isn't worried about losing the game. You know why? He has a player that he hasn't sent in yet.
The tall guy.
You don't know Steph Curry, do you? This is Steph Curry, okay? So the coach of this Little League team, he has Steph Curry sitting on the bench. And he knows he's not worried about the end of the game, because just at the right time, he's going to send Steph Curry in, and Steph Curry is going to dunk on all the other little kids, and then they're going to win the game. And the other team's going to go home crying. All right? Now, you've probably never heard it put like that. Me either. I thought long and hard about this. But there was a lot of truth in what a lot of you were saying, that, you know, yes, God is in control, but, you know, we're this Little League team, and we're doing our best, but sometimes you got to pick your nose. You know, sometimes you got to go up in the stands and tell mama. You know, sometimes you got to run off the court and go to the bathroom or whatever, you know. And so we're like that. We have our own will. We have our own, and God's up there. He's in control. He's telling you the rules. He's teaching us the game. He's inspiring us. He's helping us be better players. But then just at the right time, he knows we're going to win in the end. That's being in control. And, you know, you may be in your situation. You might, you know, sometimes the cares of life start weighing in, and maybe it's at work and the craziness there, or you know, maybe life turns that happen our way or whatever, and we feel like things are just going out of control. And we try our hardest to keep up, and you know, we're trying to you know, catch up with things, and then sometimes God pulls a play out that you weren't expecting, and he sends you from Pine Bluff to El Dorado, and you're scratching your head thinking, I don't remember wanting this, or whatever. And so, you know, all these crazy things go on, but in the middle of all that, there's still a coach that has a plan. There's still a coach that the rules hasn't changed, so he's teaching you the rules. You have a coach that's loving. You know, maybe there's probably some on YouTube somewhere that you could find, but most of the time, Little League coaches don't slap people across the head when they make mistakes, because they're kids. It's like, come here, little Johnny. Let me brush you off. Okay, blow your nose. Okay, now get back out there. And so God lovingly directs his children and moves us around and continually tries to help us in the game. But he's never out of control. We may think he's out of control sometimes because our life gets chaotic. But God's not just nitpickingly, being a puppet master over every aspect of your life. Okay, you're walking within his plan. You may look like the Tasmanian devil walking in that plan, spinning around. Okay, but he's guiding you, he's directing you in that plan. But in the end, we know that there's a Savior, there's Jesus Christ that's going to step on the scene, and the devil just instantly loses. He cannot win. And so that's what I want to leave you with tonight. So what do we do in the meantime? We can't look past the stuff that we have in front of our face, and we can't see the future, right? We don't know if the van's going to get fixed. We don't know if we're going to find a full a cleaning staff. We don't know what's going to happen down the road, but there is something that we can do. And David said it like this in Psalm 33, starting with verse 13. The Lord looks down from heaven, and he sees the whole human race. From his throne he observes all who live on earth. He made their hearts, so he understands everything they do. The best equipped army cannot save a king, nor is great strength enough to save a warrior. Don't count on your war horse to give you victory. For all its strength, it cannot save you. But the Lord watches over those who fear him, those who rely on his unfailing love. He rescues them from death. He keeps them alive in times of famine. We put our hope in the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord, for our hope is in you alone.
Yes.
That's where our hope is. And so when life gets crazy, when things are turned upside down, if we were living in the 200s, we would think that, where is God when we need him? But just around the corner, a little boy was born. And that boy would grow to be emperor. And that emperor would be a pivot point for the entire church. And the whole world would hinge on that. And things would happen that affect even this country today because of Constantine. And so don't think for a moment, just because there may be craziness in your life, or just because you may think that God forgot about you, don't think for a moment that God is not in control. Sometimes we're out of control, but God is in control.